sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. His lovely face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. His oath, His covenant, His blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, He then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When He shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand.
Hey everybody, welcome to Boulder Creek Community Church. My name is Adam, and I am just so grateful today that you have chosen to listen to this message. And it is my sincere hope and prayer that God will use His word to impact your life and to bring hope and encouragement wherever you're at, in whatever circumstances you find yourself in. In fact, I'm excited because today we are going to kick off a new series called There Is Hope. There is hope. This last week, another pastor told me about a doctor at Stanford. And this doctor was talking about the COVID curve, which we have all heard of. But he says there's also a COVID emotional curve that we need to be even more aware of. Some of you remember just way back a few weeks ago when we all were first coming into this sheltering in place. A lot of us were feeling motivated, maybe even excited. We were showing initiative, and we were out there almost in a manic response, shopping, preparing for sheltering in place. But now, after 4 weeks of it, the doctor went on to say that that manic, almost excited state that we were in is now turned into depression or even grief or even despair. We started to grieve some of the things that we've lost. Some of us have lost a certain amount of freedom, the ability to go to the beach or places that we like to go. We are missing the connection with others to be able to come to church and hug our loved ones, our friends. And then there's this weird thing going on where if we do go outside, people are going out of their way to avoid us, and we are going out of our way to avoid any kind of contact with anyone else. And we're all suspicious of one another. And it's playing with our minds, and it's not good for our hearts or our souls. And so we could all use some hope at this point. Hope is absolutely essential to life. And today we're going to look at a passage of Scripture in Romans chapter 8 that I consider maybe one of the most essential passages of Scripture as regards to hope.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. For we were saved in this hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Likewise the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. For we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose.
Someone once said that we can live just over 40 days without food, we can live just over 3 days without water, and we can live about 8 minutes without air, but we cannot live a moment without hope. Viktor Frankl is a well-known psychologist who survived the Nazi death camps. Specifically, he was at Auschwitz. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was fascinated by the way people responded to suffering. And he indicated that there was at least 4 ways people responded to suffering. You had, number one, a group of people that just turned brutal. They were good people. They would have been good neighbors, but something clicked under the pressure and the intense suffering of a Nazi concentration camp. And then there was a group of people that just absolutely gave up. He tells the story of one guy who had a dream that the war would be over on March 30th. And he was convinced that it was a revelation from God. And as the day approached, he realized that it was not going to happen. And on March 29th, he fell ill with a fever. And on March 30th, he lost consciousness. And on March 31st, he was dead. The loss of hope had lowered his body's immune system and the ability to resist viruses and diseases in the camp. A third group of people held on. They hoped that one day they would get their life back. They would get their health, their family, their professional achievements, their fortune, their position in society. But after the war, many of these people plunged into deep despair, and some even committed suicide. Why? After surviving a concentration camp, why would they fall to despair and even some commit suicide? Well, he explains that no earthly treasure or pleasure could ever replace the incredible suffering that they had endured. And so they fell into disillusionment. But a fourth group of people, and they were few, but somehow they were able to remain kind and keep their sense of dignity and inner liberty. But only a few. Only a few seemed to have the inner strength that lifted them above their circumstances. See, a concentration camp can tear open the soul and expose its depth and its foundation. And as people came to him for help and for counsel, he would tell them this: life only has meaning if we have a hope and a meaning that even death and suffering cannot destroy. And so let's define what hope is. Let's understand what hope is from a Christian and biblical perspective. Hope, number one, is the confident expectation that the best is yet to come. The best is yet to come. And we have to understand in light of what hope is not. See, hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is not, I hope so. It's not like, I hope this virus goes away by Tuesday, or that I hope that I win the lottery, or I hope that the 49ers win the Super Bowl. Hope is also not an emotion. Emotions can be erratic and undependable and can often be rooted in lies. Hope is also not just positive thinking. A lot has been written about the power of positive thinking in recent decades. And I am all for positive thinking. We could all use some positive news these days. But as a pastor, I never want to be that guy who is standing in the rain telling you that the sun is shining. I find it interesting that there was a study done that showed that people who are naturally upbeat and optimistic tend to think that they have way more friends than they really do. And they tend to think that most people like them more than they really do. But it also says that there are those who are slightly depressed. But these slightly depressed people tend to be more accurate perceivers of reality than the optimist. And so we have this conundrum. Is it better to be sad and realistic or happy and deluded? I'll let you decide what works for you. But this is why I absolutely love the Bible. See, the Bible is brutally honest about life. And yet, the Bible is uplifting. It promises difficulty, pain, and suffering and loss. And yet it offers us joy and peace and hope even in the midst of that. And Paul, if anyone understood how to deal with suffering and yet remained hopeful, it was him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he describes his suffering. Listen to this. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and often have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and I have gone without food. I have been cold and naked, and besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. See, Paul understood this. He understood that there is no way to get through life without knowing how to get through suffering. And there's no way to get through suffering without hope. And so hope is a confident assurance. It is a certainty that the best is yet to come. In fact, in the book of Philippians, Paul says this: I am torn. I would rather, and I want to depart from this life and be with Christ. But nevertheless, I will remain for your sake. And so Paul understood that hope was a confident expectation. And Christian hope also requires a perspective that you intentionally build into your life. In 1915, William Eli Hill published his famous painting of his wife and his mother-in-law. And a 2018 study shows that what you see depends on your age. How many of you recognize the picture that you're looking at right now? Do you see the young woman or the old lady? See, your perspective determines your perception. This 2018 study showed that what you see depends on your age. And so young people tend to see the young woman while older people tend to see the old lady. Your perspective determines your perception. In other words, your perspective on pain and suffering will determine your perception of it. Is this a good thing, a bad thing? Is it meaningless or is it meaningful? Your perspective on loss and pandemics will determine your perception and your experience of it. And so let me share with you 3 perspectives so that we can live with hope. We need a proper perspective. And Paul, in these verses in Romans chapter 8, give us at least 3 perspectives. The first perspective that I want to share with you is that creation is broken. Did you notice what it said about creation? That it's in bondage, that it's subject to, that it's decaying, and that it's death. And then he uses a really unusual word to attach to creation, to nature. He says nature or creation is groaning. See, Paul is telling us and reminding us that the world that God originally created is gone. This is not what God intended when he created nature. But it eagerly awaits. Nature groans as it eagerly awaits for our redemption. But for now, we experience disease. For now, we experience natural disasters. For now, we experience viruses. And we experience decay. And we experience death. See, nature is beautiful but broken. Creation is also beautiful but brutal. And while we may love watching nature documentaries, nature is full of death and decay. Years ago, I lived in southern Africa, and a friend of mine invited me to go out with him because he was given the task to build up Swaziland's nature museum. He was a taxidermist. And so he needed to find a particular type of monkey for the museum. And so I got to go with him as he hunted for this monkey. And I'll never forget being out in the jungles of Africa. And I'll never forget the beauty my eyes took in. But I will also never forgive the smell and the stench of decaying and death. At one point we turned upwind and all of a sudden it hit us smack in the face. And about 100 yards up, we finally figured out what the stench was. And we came up upon a 25-foot boa constrictor that had been dead for about a year. I will never forget the smell of nature. Our world is indeed beautiful, but it is also broken. And not only does nature groan, but you and I groan. Not only is our world decaying, but so are you and I. And anyone who is over 40 understands exactly what I'm saying. My youngest son, Johnny, after we adopted him, a couple years after, he was trying to do the math in his head as to how old I would be when he was 18. And so he pondered that and he says, "Dad, you're going to be 60 when I'm 18. And I said, "Yep, thank you for reminding me." And then he pondered some more and he says, "And Dad, when I'm 22, you'll be dead." Thanks, son. Really appreciate it. See, there is an entropy about all of life. Our bodies are decaying. All of creation groans as it decays, and you and I groan as well. This is so important to understand as a Christian because not all of our pain and suffering is our fault. Not all of our suffering is because we lack faith or that we've done something wrong. I love this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon clip. Hobbes says to Calvin, "Do you think there's a God?" And as Calvin ponders it, he then answers, "Somebody's out to get me." Some of you may think that God is out to get you, and let me tell you, he's not. God sent his only begotten Son. He lived the perfect life that you could never live, and he died the death that you and I deserved. But you need to understand that Christ died for you because he is for you. And while we may experience all kinds of suffering, we yet live with a confident expectation that better things are yet to come. In fact, the best is yet to come. Paul also tells us in these verses, not only is the world broken, but you and I, and all of our suffering is temporary. Romans 8 and verse 18 says this, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. And so Paul does a compare and contrast my current circumstances, my current suffering, compared to my future glory. This word consider means logic, or to use logic. It means to compute or to do the math. And so Paul, who experienced an incredible amount of suffering in his life, yet lived with incredible hope. See, he's telling us, I've done the math, guys, and it doesn't compare. No matter what kind of suffering you're experiencing now, it does not compare. And so whatever we are facing, whatever we may have to face in this life, it is temporary. It is temporary. In 2015, I had a sabbatical. And what does a pastor with no money and a kid in college do with this sabbatical? Instead of going to the beach or mountain biking, what do? I take my son for 4 weeks to work in a fishery in Alaska. 16-hour days. All we did was work, eat, and sleep. And let me tell you about the work. It was the most mundane, mind-numbing, tedious work, standing in one spot for hour after hour after hour. It was miserable. I'm not even sure to this day if it was worth the money that we made. But let me give you another example. Imagine there are two guys and you are giving them a job. You put them in a room and you tell them, look, I know this is mind-numbing, this is mundane, it's tedious work. But if you will work for 16 hours a day, all you'll do is eat, sleep, and work. And you tell one of the guys, after 1 year of this, you'll get $15,000. And you're thinking, yeah, right, no way, it's not worth it. But the other guy, you tell him, after 1 year, 16-hour days, nothing but work, eat, and sleep. But at the end of 12 months, you will get $15 million. You know what you're going to get? You're going to get one guy who's miserable, who does nothing but complain, who feels enslaved and imprisoned. And all he wants to do is quit. And over here, you got a guy who's whistling Dixie. He's as happy as a clam. He doesn't care about the pain because he is looking forward to the reward. And so let me ask you, what is your perspective? How are you framing your current circumstances? How are you framing the pain, the loss, the suffering that has come into your life? It makes all the difference in the world. I love this quote by Mother Teresa. She says famously, compared to the glories of heaven, all of our suffering here on earth will be like one night in a bad hotel. John Newton, the famous author of Amazing Grace, once said this, when you understand your future glory, nothing is too good that you can't believe it, and nothing is so bad that you can't bear it. The best is yet to come. And so God gives us a third perspective that we need to have when it comes to our suffering in our present circumstances. And that perspective is that no matter what we believe, no matter what we feel, God is working. And God is working to redeem all things. Look at what he says in verse 21. that creation itself will be liberated. And not only that, but we wait eagerly for the redemption of our bodies. What does Paul mean here? What is he talking about? Well, first of all, he's talking about creation. He's talking about nature. And nature, although it's not nature's fault, is groaning and suffering because of our sin. You got to go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and when Adam and Eve sinned, when they chose to rebel against God and go their way instead of God's way, not only did it impact them, it impacted all of creation. And so listen, you think a sunset is beautiful now? Just imagine when God is finished recreating, when he is finished recreating a new heavens and a new earth. You think a redwood tree is stunning now and beautiful? Imagine, just think of what it will be like in the kingdom to come. Martin Luther was once asked if he knew the world would come to an end the following day, what would he do with the rest of his time? And you know what he said? He said, I'll plant a tree. And here's what I think he meant. Imagine that tree that he plants, what it will be like when God renews creation. Imagine the fruit from that tree when God recreates anew everything that he has made. Elizabeth Elliot once said that when we see a clam, we ought to stand in awe of it. For a clam is better at being the clam that God made it to be than we are at being the men or the women that we were made to be. So God is renewing nature. But not only is he renewing nature, he is going to give you and I new bodies. And this is what he means by redeeming our bodies. He's going to take these old, dying, decaying bodies and give us new bodies. And what does this mean? We don't know exactly, but we are given some hints in the scriptures. You remember the story when Jesus rose from the dead? And the disciples were confused, and the disciples had no idea what was going on. And suddenly Jesus appeared with them in a room with locked doors. And their first reaction was a ghost. But then Jesus tells them, hey guys, I'm hungry. Give me some fish. I think what we are seeing here is a hint as to what our resurrected bodies will be like. Let me give you this example. Maybe this has happened to you. You had a friend in childhood, but then you moved away or they moved away, and then suddenly you're 25, 30 years old, and you run into them, and it's like, I know you. There's something so familiar about you. And then you realize it's your friend from 10 years old. And they're the same, but they're different. You can see it that they have the face and the eyes, and you know it's them, but now they are grown, now they are mature. I get the sense that it might be something like that, where we will recognize one another. We will know and be able to tell one another apart, but there will be something more glorious, more mature about us. Let me give you another example. Imagine living a week without one of your five senses. Maybe some of you did this when you were in elementary school and you walked around with a blindfold on all day, or maybe headphones and so that you couldn't hear anything. And you learned that even without one of our five senses, life can be difficult and complicated. But imagine this. Imagine us with our new glorious bodies, not with five senses, but with 1,000 senses, or maybe even 10,000 senses. We have no idea really, but that's just the body. Imagine our minds, which tend to get cluttered and tired and groggy and distracted, and we all have ADD and squirrel moments. Imagine being able to be focused. Imagine being able to think with utter clarity about everything. What about our emotions? You know, some of us are on one end where emotions are erratic and imbalanced, and some of us, especially guys, tend to be no emotion, right? We don't show any emotion because we're under control. But the truth is when we get our new bodies, not only will our bodies be renewed, our emotions will be renewed, and they'll be balanced and healthy. What about our wills? Imagine our wills, which tend to be so susceptible to weakness. I mean, we try to diet and we can't. We try to exercise and we don't. And we give into temptations and we sin. But imagine our wills being bent toward always wanting to do what is right and what is good and what is healthy. See, Paul is telling us that we are going to get not only a new heavens and a new earth, but we're going to get new bodies to inhabit that new heaven and new earth. But Paul goes on and he says, not only is God working to redeem everything, he's also telling us that he's working in the midst of now, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our suffering. Look at what he says starting in verse 6. In the same way, the Spirit helps, and so the Spirit is helping, he's working by helping us in our weaknesses. We do not know how we ought to pray, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. And we know, I love this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. Now let me be clear here. Paul is not saying that bad things are actually good things. Absolutely not. Paul is telling us here that we can live with hope and at the same time experience deep grief that causes us to groan. For the average person, this makes no sense. See, either you are hopeful and happy or you are groaning. Either you have hope because you have something that you want, or you are certain that you will get something that you hope for, or you are groaning because you have lost something that you want or that you hope for. And ultimately, all of our suffering is just that. It's losing something. Either something that we have, or we're losing something that we had been hoping for. Paul says that we can both groan and have hope. And that we can experience groaning and yet express hope at the very same time. And the only way we can do that is with the proper perspective. See, for the Christian, our suffering pushes us toward hope, toward Christ. Suffering actually leads us to have a deeper faith, a more genuine faith. Suffering is producing something in our lives that ultimately we want and we need. And that's why James says, consider it pure joy when you encounter various trials. It's not the trials that we rejoice about. It is what it is producing in our lives that we rejoice in. And that takes the proper perspective. See, when you understand hope, when you understand Christian hope, it makes you both sadder and more joyful at the same time. See, it makes your heart bigger. Wisdom grows. Your capacity to have empathy for others grows. Your ability to bring comfort to someone else who is suffering grows. Your heart just gets bigger. Jonathan Edwards preached a sermon when he was 18 years old entitled, How to Be Completely Happy as a Christian. And he had 3 simple points to his message. Point number 1, your bad things will turn out for your good. Point number 2, your good things can never be taken away from you. And point number 3, the best things are yet to come. But for now, we wait. But we wait with a confident expectation that the best is yet to come. My now 22-year-old daughter, 4 or 5 years ago, went through a very, very difficult season in her life. And she wrote this note and allowed me to share it with you today. She calls it Upside Down. She says the last 2 weeks have been some of the hardest I've ever had to go through. And the thing is, I think I felt this season coming. I remember saying to a dear friend, things have been so good, and I think it's going to be hard soon. But I know there's going to be a purpose. I didn't mean it in the cliche kind of way where it's so good something must go wrong type of way. I truly felt the Lord was preparing my heart for something. In no way was I completely prepared for what I'm going through and dealing with now. I don't even really have words for it. And I won't for a while. But I'm leaning into the silence a bit, knowing the words will come if and when the Lord wants me to say them or share them. Right now it's between Him and me. Right now I weep. One day I will feel the sun on my face with gladness, but right now it's closed shutters. One day I won't even remember the feeling of loss or pain, but today I allow it to knock me over. Today I feel everything that my heart can bear, and then some. It was never promised, if I checked all the boxes, that I would get everything my heart desires and more. Nor would I really want it that way. If I truly think about it, His way is better. Even if right now I wince when I say it, His way is better. We will feel and deal with everything that sin causes on this side of eternity: pain, loss, grief, doubt. So today I feel all that I could possibly feel while simultaneously resting in the Father's arms, crawling up on His lap and being held. Not checking boxes, but asking hard questions. Doubting, crying, and being angry, but also holding on to the promise of my living hope. The hope of a better tomorrow, even if that tomorrow is weeks or months or a lifetime away. Life is hard, but God is good. And even when I'm angry with Him, even when I've screamed at Him, wanted to be anywhere but with Him, He stood still and is still good. He still provides for me. Even when for some moments I doubt His goodness, He waits. Not pushing shame, not rushing my healing, waiting for me, collecting my tears and holding me tight. All so that He can continue and finish His good work that He began in me. See, but now, we wait. We wait patiently. And we groan. Nature groans. But did you notice there is a third groaning in this passage? Someone else groans. That's right, the Holy Spirit. God knows what it's like to groan too. When Jesus hung on the cross, He quoted Psalm 22. Let me read the whole first verse to you. Psalm 22, verse 1 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? But then He goes on and He says, why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? I don't know what that does to your heart and soul, but it gives me such a level of comfort knowing that I have a God, that I follow a God, that I worship a God who knows what it's like to suffer, who knows what it's like to groan. And we have a God who groaned so that one day you and I, our groaning would come to an end. That's hope. That's hope that's rooted in reality. Let me ask you, do you live today with that kind of hope? Will you choose to put your trust in Jesus today? Will you choose to put your hope in Jesus? This is not complicated. It will be the most significant thing and maybe most difficult thing down the road. But it is as simple as saying a prayer like this. Jesus, today I choose to put my hope in you. Jesus, today I choose to trust you with my life. Jesus, today I choose to trust you with my future, with my finances, with my family and my loved ones. And Jesus, I even trust you with my health. I realize that everything I've ever put my hope in has failed me or let me down. And so, Father, help me to remember that the best is yet to come. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for understanding our pain and our suffering. Thank you for being a God who is not distant and some cosmic being that is untouchable or unapproachable. But God, you are a God who came near to us, and you entered into the human experience, and you understand what it means to suffer. And so God, who else could help us understand how to live in the present with a confident anticipation that better things are yet to come? And so God, in the meantime, help us as we wrestle with difficulties, as we wrestle with loss, as we wrestle with fears and anxieties, as we battle these things on a regular basis, and even as we battle decay and death. God, remind us that our hope is not in what is temporary, but our hope is what is yet to come. And we are looking forward to those glorious days when you will redeem not only our bodies, but all of nature itself. And so, God, we give you thanks and we give you glory. And we thank you for who you are and who you are for us. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you all. And I want to encourage you once again that if you have questions, that if you have prayer requests, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Here is my email and my cell phone. Please don't hesitate to text or to email, and I would be happy to pray with you and to pray for you. As we close this service, I want to close with some worship. And so I invite you just to worship along, whether you raise your hands or stand or kneel, or just silently listen to the music and listen and read the words. I pray that they would minister to your heart. They would uplift your soul, and that you would be filled with hope. A hope that is rooted in Jesus and in who he is for you. God bless you all, and I look forward to being with you again next week.
Fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunge beneath that flood, lose all their guilty stains, lose all their guilty guilty stains, and sinners plunge thy power to save. Then in a nobler, sweeter song, I'll sing thy power to save. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love, at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my voice and let me sing, always only for my King, always only for my King. Take my silver and my gold, none of my wood I withhold. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise, let them flow in ceaseless Take my will and make it thine. It shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thy own. It shall be thy royal throne. It shall be thy royal Take my heart, it is thine own. It shall be thy royal throne. It shall be thy royal throne.
I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean. His face I at last shall see. 'Twill be my joy through the ages to sing of His love for me, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever